It is what it is. Alright, so again, thank you so much for giving up your PLC planning time. I know that in speaking with Mr. Coles, you guys have really made a concerted effort to grow instructionally, come together as a team to best support our kids here at Tyler Legacy. So really the best next step when working with our inclusion kiddos, partnering with our inclusion teachers, is to look at some of these best practices, okay? How about that? All right, so today we're gonna talk just briefly about the beliefs of special education, benefits and challenges of inclusion, because we know that there are a lot of great things, but it can be tough for a number of reasons. Ways to help create inclusive classrooms, advantages to collaborative learning, some collaborative teaching approaches, and then we'll just have some final thoughts as we close the day. So, beliefs about special education. Here at Tyler Legacy, we are committed to providing quality services to students with disabilities. This commitment is based upon the belief that special education kiddos are gen ed kids first, okay? We wanna make sure that special ed is a service and not a place, okay? Our kiddos deserve the same as everyone else, but they get a little bit more based on their needs and their disability. And that's what we have here. Every special ed kiddo deserves access to the gen ed curriculum. Again, this team does really, really well with regards to ensuring that all kids have equitable access. And so this is just really the icing on top of that. I'm gonna move this. So why is it important that we place focus on inclusion? You might not realize this, but over 80% of the students being served through special education spend the majority of their day in the general ed setting. So yes, they have some difficulties associated to their disability, but the majority of those kids are in our classes. And so we wanna make sure that you have the support you need to ensure that they're being successful, okay? So a few benefits. Number one, academic growth. Research supports that students in special education make far better gains than their counterparts who are served in a resource setting. They're exposed to not only their peers, so they're providing collaboration with kiddos who are helping them learn, but they have some diverse perspectives for themselves, but also your gen ed kids are able to grow in this area. Social skills development. Students develop essential social skills, empathy and acceptance, when they have those meaningful interactions. We have a lot of kiddos here who are not your typical gen ed friend, and so, you know, they maybe have some vocalizations that are noticed by others, or they have some physical impairments. And most of the kiddos here at Tyler Legacy are willing to accept them with open arms. And that really is due in large part to having them in those inclusion settings and building those relationships. It provides self-advocacy skills. So inclusion empowers students to advocate for themselves. It helps boost their self-esteem and their confidence as they navigate different learning environments. So can you think of any other benefits to having inclusion kiddos in your classrooms that you're willing to share out?
Well, I mean, you said that it gives the empathy. I mean, having them there not only benefits them, but it benefits the gen ed students as well.
Absolutely.
Because they are going to come across all different kinds of people when they graduate. So why alienate just this one population and people don't interact, and so now they get to interact.
Yeah, our goal in education is to educate kids, but it's also to prepare kids for post-secondary life. And so we wanna make sure that they're able to navigate those relationships, even with people out in the real world, so they know how to appropriately handle themselves, both our special ed kids, but also our kiddos who are typical.
I would also say that it provides the instructor the opportunity to be reminded of the fact that of providing additional tools and resources.
Sure.
You know, because if you're just thinking about it from one way and you're not thinking about, oh, I need to make sure to include these things for these students,
Absolutely.
but then you can make it available to everybody.
Yeah, a reduction in barriers. Absolutely, that's a great point. So with benefits, there are challenges, and we all know that. We see those regularly. So some of those include, on the same token we're discussing, those diverse learning needs. It can be difficult to address a wide range of learning difficulties within a classroom. So when kiddos are needing some, very substantial individualization, that can get tough, especially when we are held to the standard of TEKS, right? So that is one of the challenges that we face, for sure. Resource allocation, and we really have felt this year, because we did lose a couple special ed PCNs on the para side of things, but that puts a little bit of a pinch on the resources we have. I mean, I know Ms. Craig, for example, is there, and Mrs. Richardson, there are classes that they are serving inclusion in 2 classes in the same period, which we haven't had historically. So there's certainly, the allocation of resources can make it difficult to provide really substantial, hearty inclusion supports. And then lastly, educator collaboration. Building effective teams and fostering collaboration is really, really important when we are talking inclusion, but it can be tough because Ms. Craig shares a PLC with you guys, but Ms. Richardson doesn't. I know Mr. Manton has some inclusion English classes, Coach Parks and Mrs. Kolak, but they're not here because they're in other classes. They're in history classes and science classes and all over the place. So although we need that collaboration, it's a little bit tough for us. So of these things, what can we control? Well, we have at least some level of control over. Probably not this, right? Collaboration. So we've got to get creative about how we are in contact with the teachers that we're working with when they're not in our PLCs or we don't have a common planning time. Okay, so that's something that as we move forward throughout today's presentation, be thinking about how could we best do this? How could we make this work? Is there an outside of the box way to collaborate so that we can use some of these tools and these pieces? Okay. There's a few ways we can work to create inclusive classrooms. People in this room do this well. Creating a positive classroom environment. By nurturing a positive and inclusive classroom climate, it fosters that respect. Again, we go back to empathy, and it promotes a sense of belonging for all students. That's our goal. We're developing educationally, but we're also developing people who are gonna go out to the world and be good humans, right? And so by fostering that positive collaboration within the classroom, all kiddos feel like that they can be there and be successful. Some additional ways, flexible grouping, all right? So I know that sometimes we separate our special ed kids out, we go in the hall, do a quick small group, but, and I don't know that everyone realizes this, it's okay to intermix your special ed and your gen ed kids and your inclusion person work with a group that is heterogeneously mixed. In the end, if the inclusion person is supporting you and the kids, any of the kids, that opens up time for you, right? So if Ms. Craig or Ms. Richardson takes 3 or 4 gen ed kids along with their group who are struggling, but maybe there's a couple of spec kids who stay in because they're actually getting the concept, right? Then they are giving them that extra attention. All that counts towards their inclusion time. And then utilizing the UDL framework. Is anyone familiar with the universal? Oh, well okay, I have a quick little snippet video just to give a brief introduction to UDL. We could do like full day training on UDL. This is just so that you know what it is. It's really great. Now, if we can hear it is the key. I'm gonna pause.
On the keyboard, if you hit FN and then the volume up on the top, like by your like F12 keys, that'll turn the volume up on the actual computer.
Miss Carter.
Is it a loud video?
This teacher needs to meet a curriculum goal, and she's got a very diverse group of students. And so does this teacher. And this one. Most do. In fact, research shows that the way people learn is as unique as their fingerprints. What does this mean for teachers of today? Classrooms are highly diverse and curriculum needs to be designed from the start to meet this diversity. Universal Universal design for learning is an approach to curriculum that minimizes barriers and maximizes learning for all students. Whoa, that's a fancy term. Universal design for learning. Let's unpack it a bit. Let's think about the word universal. By universal, we mean curriculum that can be used and understood by everyone. Each learner in the classroom brings her own background, strengths, needs, and interests. Curriculum should provide genuine learning opportunities for each and every student. Now let's think about the word learning. Learning is not one thing. Neuroscience tells us that our brains have three broad networks. One for recognition, the what of learning, one for skills and strategies, the how of learning, and one for caring and prioritizing, the why of learning. Students need to gain knowledge, skills, and enthusiasm for learning, and a curriculum needs to help them do all three. But every learner is unique, and one size does not fit all. So how do we make a curriculum that challenges and engages diverse learners? This is where the word design comes in. A universally designed building is planned to be flexible and to accommodate all kinds of users, with and without disabilities. It turns out that if you design for those in the margins, your building works better for everyone. Curb cuts and ramps are used by people in wheelchairs, people with strollers, and people on bikes. Captioning on TV serves people who are deaf, people learning English, people in gyms, and spouses who get to sleep at different times. UDL takes this idea and applies it to the design of flexible curriculum. UDL goes beyond access because we need to build in support and challenge. So how do we use the UDL framework to make learning goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone? First, ask yourself, what is my goal? What do I want my students to know, do, and care about? Then ask, what barriers in the classroom might interfere with my diverse students reaching these goals? To eliminate the barriers, use the 3 UDL principles to create flexible paths to learning so that each student can progress. Number 1, provide multiple means of representation. Present content and information in multiple media and provide varied supports. Use graphics and animation, highlight the critical features, activate background knowledge, and support vocabulary so that students can acquire the knowledge being taught. Number 2, provide multiple means of action and expression. Give students plenty of options for expressing what they know and provide models, feedback, and supports for their different levels of proficiency. Number 3, provide multiple means of engagement. What fires up one student won't fire up another. Give students choices to fuel their interests and autonomy. Let them risk mistakes and learn from them. If they love learning, they will persist through challenges. And remember, always keep in mind the learning goal. Get rid of barriers caused by the curriculum and keep the challenge where it belongs. And that's it. Okay, quick recap. Show the information in different ways. Allow your students to approach learning tasks and demonstrate what they know in different ways. And offer options that engage students and keep their interest.
So really, UDL is a framework, but it's really just looking at learning through a different lens. What are the goals? What barriers are gonna be in the way of me being able to reach my students and get us to the end goal, okay? Did anything stand out to any of you? Any ahas or wow, I already do that? Ms.
I
Harper?
like that it talked about default designing lessons and things for the folks in the margins so that everybody benefits from them.
Absolutely.
And I've done something similar with that, like when I was going through like my 504 paperwork and stuff last year, I started doing this, like if one kid gets a graphic organizer, everybody's getting one. Cause I never want my special education, my 504 kids to feel singled out and to be like, well, why did they get it and we don't? So it's like, if it could benefit everyone, I don't mind making like 20 extra copies and giving it to everyone.
Absolutely.
May I add to that?
Yes, ma'am.
Best practices, your IEPs, your accommodations, those are your best friend when dealing with special education students. If you totally study those and read those, in those reports, you're gonna find out what happened from previous teachers or what we did previously last year or whatever. It is your best friend in anything we're dealing with special education, students, and we wanna make sure that we don't single them out. As an inclusion teacher in English, y'all already know, I'll do a small group over here right in class, I'll do that. If I'm taking out testing, I don't single it out for special education, because if you try to do that, some kids are embarrassed about having a special education heading. So to alleviate that, when I'm in the classroom, I open it up for everybody, so everybody have an opportunity to do that. Because what you don't want to do is make them feel ashamed because they have a disability.
Sure.
So that's the best practice.
Thanks for that. I think what is important to remember, what is our, in the end, what is our goal?
To educate.
Education.
Education, mastery of TEKS, right? So I think sometimes as teachers, and I was guilty of this at times, we get high-centered on like, well, this is the way I do it. This is the way I know they learned, but is it the only way? So if there is a way to adjust, if there is a way that's going to help the kids in the margins, to be able to show that they've learned, it's okay if it looks a little different, and it's okay if it looks different for everyone. There are kids in your classrooms who aren't served by special education who could benefit from it. I can think of one specific kid right now who's a senior who he has been tested multiple times. He is too low to be considered with a learning disability, because you have to have adequate intelligence, and he's about a mid-75 range, but that is too high to have an intellectual disability. So he is in the gray area. That's called a globally low learner. Could he benefit from some of the things that our special ed kids are? Absolutely. So there are kids sitting in your room who may not be special ed, but they still need extra support to make sure that they can master the content, because in the end, they're taking the same test as everybody else. We're preparing them for the same world outside of high school, right? Very good, thank you. All right, let's see here. Navigate the clear touch, get back to the presentation. All right. So along the same lines, you guys have done a really good job this year of focusing on some collaborative learning opportunities. Having your kids work collaboratively is a really powerful tool for our kiddos, because it provides opportunities for everyone to be successful. Some advantages include improved engagement, enhanced critical thinking skills, and again, those increased social interactions. What's great about collaborative learning is we're able to assess kiddos at different levels, right? So we're gonna talk a little bit about 6 collaborative teaching structures, okay? And I have given it this name, collaborative teaching structures, because I'm gonna say a word, and it's been a little bit taboo here at Tyler Legacy because it's overwhelming, but it's really co-teaching, okay? But co-teaching, when people think co-teach, they think team teaching, and that's just one structure. We're gonna talk about each of these individually, but we do this a lot. We one teach, one assist, a lot. We sometimes one teach, one observe, because this is when we're collecting some data. So our special ed teachers doing some data collection pieces. You guys, I already know some of you are working on station teaching. So we are doing so much of this, and it's technically called co-teaching, but their IEPs don't say co-teaching. This is just a good best practice of how we're serving kiddos. So we're gonna talk about each one of these. I've got a little short video and some notes, and then we'll kind of debrief. So I'm gonna give each of you, and then this will be good for your knowledge, okay? Yeah, do you wanna just like take a few, pass them around? Here you go, friend, you're welcome. Mhm. Thank you, you're welcome. One more?
You're
Alright.
so quiet, I forgot you were back.
Surprise! You're welcome.
If you can see them like that, that'd be
Yes, ma'am. Alright, so let's start with what we know. This is something we do a lot here in my walkthroughs and things, and seeing teachers in the classroom. We utilize one teach, one assist a lot. So we're gonna just take a quick and,
Coaching class is for you.
just kidding, it's a
If you're really
commercial.
good coach on, you know how to sell, you just need more people to sell to. In other words,
No, thank you, Johnny.
Oh, there's a.
Oh my gosh, another one.
There's a good chance somebody's trying to hack your website right now.
We're not getting hacked. So these are just each one has a quick like 2-minute-er, and then we'll kind of discuss.
In this strategy, one teach, one assist, one teacher acts as the primary teacher, while the other assists and supports the learners. In this demonstration, the primary teacher is a mentor, and the assist position of the lesson is carried out by a resident teacher. These two roles can be switched, depending on the strengths of each teacher and the content being taught. The co-teacher assists by monitoring student work, addressing behavior issues, answering student questions, distributing materials, or asking the lead teacher to clarify any developing student misconceptions.
If you have a class where you know that it's more of a behavior issue, it's really getting the students to be on task. If you have a class where it's, if the kids are more engaged and into it, then it's really asking them those, higher level questions to make them think more. Or if they're pair sharing, encouraging them to pair share.
This strategy is helpful when distributing materials during hands-on lessons or when closely monitoring student learning during lessons and is meant to be used occasionally.
In this lesson, what I noticed that I was using a lot of was proximity with the students and monitoring their behaviors, also making sure that the students were at the same part of the worksheet, on task, and doing the same work as everybody else, as well as checking for some understanding, making sure that some of the students understood.
But the benefits of having her in that role is that I'm able to kind of just relax and teach and, just really kind of get into the moment of creating that experience for the students and not have to worry about all the little things that has to be supported. I just know that there's somebody else in the classroom that's there for me while I'm teaching, and then when that person's teaching, I can be there for them too. So it's just nice having two people teach one lesson. When we plan our lessons, I guess we take a look at what the lesson is and then decide really who's teaching that specific lesson, and then automatically the other person would go into the one assist role if that's what we decided to do. She may take more of a lead in history, then I know I would be assisting her. Whereas, science is more my thing sometimes, so she really would assist me in science. We are co-teachers and we set up your room, you wanna make sure that all of that is equal, so the students really understand that it is.
So, some takeaways. One teach, one assist. We use it a lot, right? Some benefits, some challenges, anything, some takeaways? Yes, ma'am?
At my previous school, we did more my co-teacher took turns. The only downside I saw was we had to plan together every
It's a lot of
day.
planning.
But we had our conference every day, which is
Yeah.
different, but
Yeah.
this is a lot of planning.
Yeah. To do, especially some of these higher level, like a team teach, is one, you need to be, this is gonna be hard for us, and we'll look at it just so everyone's kind of aware of the 6 ways to co-teach or the 6 structures. It's the hardest, hands down, because you've really gotta be, and it's gotta be like, that's our classroom together, right? Yes,
Right, that's more of a situation where that's the two same people together all day long. And so it makes it a little bit more challenging when you're in all different classrooms throughout.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. I think what is, and Miss Craig probably has the best advantage of the inclusion people because she is in all English classes. Where you have your English and your history, so it is more difficult. I think she's the only one. I think everyone else has a little bit of a split.
Parks has
A lot of Englishes, he's got a few Englishes.
And
Yeah.
within that history, it's not the same teacher each period.
Correct.
It's a different teacher.
Correct. So how can one teach, one assist benefit us then in that vein? If I am going to a lot of different classes, like every period I have a different teacher and a different subject, is one teach, one assist something we can do?
Absolutely.
It's probably not exactly what this is looking like, but Ms. Craig and I do it a lot in my classroom. She helps support what I'm saying by either, vocally bringing up things, or also when she's more the assisting in that moment, but she is clarifying and double checking and adding perspective and content.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important that, and I think as gen ed teachers, we all realize this, we've got some newer to our campus special ed people, and so I'm going to challenge you to maybe extend an olive branch if you've not already. It can be hard to go into someone's classroom who you're not familiar with and take a teacher role because you feel like you are, kind of impeding on their territory. So if it's not happened yet, I would encourage you to have some of those, relationship building conversations with those people when you have an opportunity, because like you're describing, that's great. I know that I've given feedback to one specific special education, staff member that was, it's okay for you to help kids who are not on your caseload. If you see a child struggling in that room, you're there, and by helping that kid, that might free up the teacher to help one of your kids.
Like my kids, I can say in my class,
Uh-huh.
it does not matter what,
They don't,
if someone
yeah,
walked in, you wouldn't know who was or who
That's
wasn't,
great.
because every
That's
single
perfect.
child in that room
that's perfect.
asks her a question, and I
Yeah.
love that,
Yep,
because they feel comfortable enough
yeah,
to ask
absolutely.
her.
Absolutely. And I even talked to, this specific teacher, I talked to them about, behavior. Proximity control is a great tool, especially if you catch behaviors early. And I explained to them, it's okay for you to correct a behavior of a kiddo who's not on your caseload. In that moment, you're both teachers in that classroom, and that is perfectly okay. So I love to hear that you guys are able to team like that.
But I take the initiative. And when I say that, I don't mean that I don't overstep,
Mm-hmm,
but I go prior to even going to, us having students.
mm-hmm.
I go and introduce myself to the teacher and let
Yes,
them know
Yes, yes, yes.
immediately, I'm here to assist you. Whatever you're saying, I'm not gonna say anything different than what you were saying. So the students will know then at that moment that we're here together, we're teaching
Sure.
together. And it goes with the behavior and everything else. We are together.
Yeah, we're
And so-
both teachers in this moment. Now, what is gonna be a little more difficult, and I'm trying to work with paraprofessionals, because we have a pretty high number of paraprofessionals providing inclusion support. Sorry, I was just trying to get loaded. But paraprofessionals have a slightly different role in the sense of they can't provide new content. So One Teach, One Assist is a great model to use if you have an English class that is supported by a paraprofessional, which is primarily our upper levels. So we tried our very best to make sure we had a certified teacher in both English 1 and English 2 because they're EOC courses, right? But, not to say that paraprofessionals aren't extremely helpful, but as we get into some of these higher, more teacher-involved collaborative structures, just keep in mind that paras, if there's any kind of, teaching, it's gotta be like a reteach. They can't be the first time a kid learns content, okay? Alright. So next is One Teach, One Observe. I think it's the next one in the handout I gave you.
Decision-making in classrooms should be focused on results. In this strategy, one teach, one observe. One teacher acts as the primary teacher, while the other gathers specific observational information on student learning. In this presentation, the resident is the primary teacher and the mentor is the observer. But these roles can be switched depending on the topic or interests of the teachers.
The purpose of the One Teach, One Observe strategy is basically to gather information or data on a student or particular students while teaching the best practices the teacher needs to use to make sure that the student is engaged in understanding or learning. We collect the data through their behaviors, how often they're on topic, how often they're not on topic.
This strategy allows teachers to better understand differences in student learning through careful observation of student behaviors or the learning environment. This strategy can also be used when one of the co-teachers is needing to gain specific information about their own teaching style or methods.
I'll do it one day and then I'll do it one day here and there, just to see if he's struggling with the student more so than I'm struggling with the student, or if I'm struggling with the student more so that he's struggling with the student. Like different strategies or different ways that we have the student engage in our teaching strategies.
Some examples of possible data to collect would be a student's academic performance during a given lesson, or their behavioral and social skills while in the classroom.
We use ABC data, which is basically
So what's really great about One Teach, One Observe, of course, if we have like upcoming ARDs and we're needing to get some additional data, we can do a One Teach, One Observe. But if you're working on anything that you're wanting to like pull a small, one kid at a time, all the kids in the room, and take some data, are we mastering topics? That's something that a special ed teacher can do, and it can be every kid in the room, if it's something we're gonna roll through quickly. We don't use this as much in high school, because, at elementary, we're looking phonics, we're looking some of those basic skills that you wanna get like one-on-one with kids. So you all probably don't use this a lot, but if you have behavior struggles in your classroom and you wanna talk to your special ed teacher about, let's take today and take as much data as you can on Sally's behavior, because I wanna figure out why she continues to talk out. I wanna figure out what is the antecedent, like what is causing it to happen, so that we can develop a plan together. Our ladies and gentlemen in special ed would do that, because if by helping with that behavior piece, the rest of the class is gonna learn better, then we're doing what's best for all the kids, okay? Thoughts on one teach, one observe? What I've given you guys kinda lists out some benefits, some challenges, and when you would best use it. We don't use this a lot, okay? Alright, this is the one that I'm like, I mean, we want to teach, one observe a little bit, but not too much. Let's see, station teaching, is that what I said? Oh, alternative. We also do that. Oh, no, just kidding. What happened? What happened? So I see alternative teaching happening pretty regularly.
Teachers, let's face it, it's not always easy to keep our students focused. You wanna know my secret weapon?
All the commercials.
In this co-teaching approach, alternative or differentiated teaching, one teacher manages a large group of students, while the other takes a small group for a specific instructional purpose. In this particular teaching sample, a resident is managing the large group, and the mentor is managing the small group, but their roles can be switched.
Alternative differentiated instruction is taking a small group of students separate from whole class, and you're either teaching them the same content material, or you use that small group away from whole class to provide intervention for students who might not have learned a concept previously.
It can also be used to, for enrichment for students who already have the concept, and we just wanna take them a little bit farther than the other students are ready for.
This approach provides instructional flexibility and can be used for enrichment, remediation, assessment, or pre-teaching, as well as for alternative methods of providing lesson input.
We can reteach, we can enrich the students' needs, we can also do behavior modifications, and give students the specific support they need to personalize their instruction.
When we plan an alternative lesson, like if a student is struggling in math and she was the one to initially teach the concept, and she's the one to notice a student who was struggling in that area, we might have her teach the concept in a small group. Or we might think, you know what, the student needs a completely different method of learning about this. So then I might be teaching the small group in order to just learn a different way of looking at things.
If I have a stronger connection with the students, it might actually be a good plan for her to have this small group to make those connections with the students too. So then in the long run, we're both connected with all of our students.
Teachers using this strategy will want to pull students for a variety of purposes, so that this approach does not create a situation in which those instructed using this format feel labeled or stigmatized in
That's what
any
you
way.
were referencing.
They do wonder why they're chosen sometimes, so we've explained to them that all students have different needs. And they understand that, they realize as the school year goes along, we have a very safe classroom environment and we're all here to learn. And so, everyone seems fine with when they're pulled in back and when they're not pulled back.
This co-teaching approach should be used occasionally when it is needed to increase the performance of particular students or groups of students.
With differentiated instruction, I feel like I can really reach my students' specific needs. I really get to know the students and I can zero in on exactly what they need me to help them with. With a small group, they can feel like, they're being heard and they can feel safe to ask questions to allow for their best understanding of the school.
To a teacher that is looking to use alternative instruction for their students, I think it's wonderful, especially with a co-teaching model, having someone else in the classroom who can support you in noticing the gaps in students' learning or the students who need to have that enrichment.
So I feel like this is something, Ms. Craig, you were talking about. This is what you guys do if you need to pull a small group. I know the challenges that come along with co-teaching or collaborative teaching is planning. So let's talk a little bit about planning for alternative instruction. If we don't have a common planning time, which we don't with most, what could we do when planning so that we're prepared to use this structure?
Communication. You have to let each other know what you're doing, and the resident or the, general ed teacher needs to make sure that their support, their special ed teachers know what they are going to be talking about, when they're going to be, cause not all of them are experts in English. They go into every classroom, they have to be a jack of all trades.
Right.
And so we have to make sure that they know that they are getting the points across that we need.
Right. I think it's great, because if we are using this as they're needing a little bit different instruction, maybe it's a little bit of a reteach, it's something that we've already worked on. So if the special ed person in your room, that's not their area of expertise, hopefully they've seen it. If we're sharing lesson plans, they can review. Do you guys have, this is a good question for me to know, do you have access to, Canvas, to all the English?
I've gotten an invitation from
Nice.
Canvas, yes.
We were just talking about that.
Yes, and I'd like to stop in and just have a conversation, just one-on-one, and just be like, okay, what do we have on tap coming up, and what do I need to kind of sort of be thinking about myself so that I'm able to help them as soon as I step in, because that's not necessarily something I see all the time.
Right.
I do history most of the time, and
Right.
so I just feel like I need to be a little bit more prepared.
This is
To be able to help.
alternative instruction is one of the structures that it places a little bit less demand on the need to be together planning. Because as a gen ed teacher, I can make my plan. I know that these 3 or 4 kids struggle with, retention of learning. So I'm going to plan a little bit further in this area, and when Miss Craig comes in, I'm gonna make sure that we did a lesson, and then she does this activity with them. And so it's a little more planning, but it doesn't necessarily require complete co-planning, right? Do you see yourself using this strategy regularly? Is this something?
I've seen that we've used this before as far as like with benchmark testing. Kids that had TEKS in similar performance levels,
Yep.
we were able to take them out in a pod with the master teacher and, go over a 5, 10, 15-minute lesson just on that based on previous data.
Yeah, I love to hear that. I think really getting down to the TEK level of where kids are struggling and grouping and doing things based on that is gonna be really beneficial in moving the needle for all of our kids, special ed kids included.
I actually did that yesterday in Ms. Carter's class.
I was gonna say, yesterday.
Number, 1, whatever they're teaching, I'm a pre-read, so I don't have, I've got the story memorized, so
Like you've already done it.
like I've already done it.
Yeah.
So I can assist them, and what I did was, I'm sitting up here, I said, now tell me about your portion. And I let them know, I've already read it, so whatever you say, I already know what's gonna happen at that point. And so what I did was, I made them read, and they couldn't understand. I said, use your context clues, and let's, annotate what this first paragraph is about.
Yep.
I had them highlighting, annotating, and whatever, and by the time they finished, they were able to give their summary of what's going on.
That's
So,
great.
It was awesome.
Yes. It is awesome.
It made me very happy. Cause
Yeah.
I do know like the group that she was working with yesterday, a couple of them are not where they should be in terms of like the reading level, so they're a bit lower.
Right.
So having that like immediate one-on-one while I'm trying to like control the rest of the room of like, hey, we don't need to be doing that right now, I need you to be doing this, and kind of being able to do that, but knowing that they're getting the help that they need while I'm trying to make sure this kid is still in the seat and not trying to get up and throw things
Sure.
is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So it was really, really good to know that they were still getting help while I'm trying to make sure that
Everybody else is doing it, yeah. I mean, if we took behavior data, the number one thing we're gonna see that causes behavior is avoidance. Kids are avoiding work, generally because it's a struggle. So by removing or coming to a small group with some of those kids who could potentially be at behavior because they're struggling, we're also nipping some of those things in the bud so that the other kids can stay better on task.
and may I say something else to that? And I didn't separate them from
Yeah,
the
you just
group.
pull them to the side.
I just, right where they were sitting, I was sitting right here, right there, because sometimes other kids be saying, "Ooh, they're dumb in this moment," they make just
You know what
try
I say?
remarks.
Ooh, you're jealous. You're jealous you don't get extra help.
And to alleviate that from happening,
Yeah.
I just did everything that I needed to do while she was carrying on in class. We had our little group right here, and they did great.
Yeah,
They
absolutely,
did great.
yeah.
I think
So-
it's nice to remind them like, hey, just because they get pulled aside doesn't necessarily mean they're
Sure.
dumb. They just need extra help with something, that doesn't
Yeah,
mean
yeah.
anything. Cause I had that issue last year with a lot of my more behavior heavy classes, like, miss, she just told me I'm stupid, so I'm stupid, so I'm done. And it's like, well, one, that was a teacher like 5 years ago, I don't think she called you stupid. But even if she did, you're not.
You're not.
You just gotta do the thing. Let me help you.
Right, absolutely. So, by the time kiddos get to high school, we are sometimes fixing some misconceptions that they have of themselves based on experiences, yeah, for sure. Alright, let's take a quick look at station teaching, cause I know that some of us in here are really trying to go this direction, which is great. So there's gonna be a commercial, sorry.
In this strategy, station teaching, the co-teachers divide their class into small groups to provide instruction at separate stations.
Station teaching is a chance for two teachers to work together and provide some individualized attention to smaller groups of students while covering several different pieces of the curriculum.
Sharon and John have divided their class into 4 small groups, and those groups rotate between specific stations. Each station presenting different but often related content. Jan will teach Station 1, and Sharon will teach Station 3. At Stations 2 and 4, students will work independently, with both teachers monitoring their progress.
When you can get them in these groups, you can employ a lot of different strategies. For one thing, it's more sort of 1-on-7, which makes it more manageable. But the other thing is we can strategize who we put in the groups. We can also group by ability. So I can take some extra time with a group who maybe has fewer skills, and I can let the more independent learners work on their own. So it allows us to split our groups up into a variety of different configurations.
After a designated amount of time at each station, the groups will rotate.
And the nice thing about working with stations is we can really modify the curriculum to match what our students need. Because it's much smaller pieces. It's not an hour of one topic, it's several small topics in shorter messages.
Station teaching reduces the student-teacher ratio, increasing student participation, and effective monitoring of the students.
I think you can also identify and feed into the curiosity of students better when you're in exploration stations, because you can actually see right in front of you somebody kind of, oh, this is grabbing my interest, and you can kind of run with that and make an educational moment out of it, and also a memorable moment, and an engagement moment.
Since this is a highly engaging instructional format, teachers may need to manage the noise level in the classroom. To be effectively implemented, the activities at each station should function independently of each other and should require roughly the same amount of time to be completed. It is recommended that this strategy be used frequently to enhance learning outcomes.
Something that's really important to me as a teacher, I feel like the kids are being heard in the small groups a little bit more, that everybody gets a chance to speak. There's a lot of different models we can follow, but it's always together and it's always with each other in mind and our students first.
So, who in here has jumped out on the limb and tried station teaching? Okay, Mr. Downs, would you care to share, hold on, not very well, your experience so far with station teaching?
We, this past week, finished up, parts of speech, and we did, each of my tables was a different part of speech, and so each station they had, identification, but they also had something else added to it, where it was writing a sentence, where there was adding description with adjectives, adverbs, and so it was just a rotation between each kind of part of speech, where they had already had that information given to them, but they were now putting it into like the
Like
writing
practice.
process, yeah.
I like it. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am?
Ms. Mendez and I have tried setting up our classes in stations, and, cause we incorporated more independent reading and grammar resources, but we also want direct instruction.
Sure.
So we have those 3 activities that the students rotate between, and since it's 20-minute increments, they don't get as bored, they don't get as antsy, there's not as many behavioral problems. It is sometimes tough to manage because you've got all these groups and not always is it 2 teachers, a lot of times it's
Sure,
one.
absolutely.
Most of the time it's one, but it's, the biggest struggle is class size.
Yeah.
It's hard to put
We
them
have
in.
we have big class sizes and big kids.
Yes.
So when
Yes.
we get them all in here, we're pretty snug, right? So I totally get it. But you hit the nail on the head in the sense of block is great, cause you can get a lot done in 100 minutes. In that same breath, block kinda sucks, cause it's really long, and kids, they get bored fast. The day and age we live in with technology, everything right at their fingertips, I mean, they blink and they're bored, right?
Yes.
And so the upside to stations, albeit a lot of planning, it really keeps kids moving and things changing, and so they don't get bored as easily. And they look up and class is over and they're shocked.
Yes.
Like, how did we get here? And you're making so much more out of your learning time, and kids are really getting so much further, and they don't even realize it. I know, for example, like I heard you say independent reading. I know that is a really big deal to Mr. Downs. That's a great station, an independent reading station, a grammar station, a mini teach with a station that's connected to the mini teach, a grammar, and there's just the multitude of things that we can put together to make stations is, I mean, really the sky's the limit. And it's a lot of planning on the front side, but once you get stations rolling, it almost runs itself, which is really great. With regards to inclusion, Mr. Downs, were you able to do this in an inclusion class?
Yeah, I had, my inclusion teacher that was kind of moving around, kind of focusing first on his kids, but kind of going from station to station and kind of helping the kids along with them.
Sure.
Because they were in one solid group the entire way through. And he provided clarification, he provided the extra help when it was needed.
Sure.
And he didn't hover either, he didn't like hover over them and just kind of, wait for their questions. If they were on task and they were getting their stuff done, he could go to another group and see how they were doing. It also helped him because, like you said, he travels around.
Sure.
And he could kind of go to the next station, see what was the processes, and then when his group got there with his kids in it, he could see, okay, he knows what he's doing before
Sure.
he's getting there.
Sure. So you were able to make it work even though you couldn't co-plan?
Right.
Yeah. The other day I did a walkthrough in your class, and y'all were using, the online resources from the textbook.
Yes, Grammar Studio.
Yep. Easy Station, right?
Yes.
Easy Station. So there are some things that are kind of pre-ready that could be stations, so that kids are working while you're working with a small group. What is great about kind of what you're describing is you can develop stations that work for you when there's not an inclusion person, but have a plan in mind of the way you're gonna group, so that when you do have the inclusion students and the person, hey, Ms. Craig, I'm gonna have you at station 3 today because they're working on X and Y, and it's really tough. Most kids are getting it, but for these kiddos, they might need a reteach, so this is the one I want you at. And so then you're there, right? So it just kind of depends on how you configure the station, but we can make it work with somewhat limited planning, okay? So one teach, one assist, something we can do really easily, we're already doing it. One teach, one observe if we're needing some extra data. Station teaching, okay, kind of getting rolling with that. Mr. Coles is a expert, Mr. Holzhauser, an expert at station teaching. So if you're ever like, hey, I wanna pick your brain, those two men, phenomenal, okay, at station teaching. We're already doing the alternative instruction, so that's that little small group piece. And then the last two, and we're just gonna touch on these briefly, is parallel teaching, team teaching. These are a little more difficult for us, given our lack of resources in terms of having you working together side by side all day team teaching, right? And so I'm just gonna do the brief overview of both of these, but we won't really get too deep, because your time is precious and I wanna get you out of here. Or if it doesn't load, then we can do that.
In the parallel teaching strategy, the co-teachers divide the class in half and instruct them on the same material.
Parallel teaching is teaching the same lesson with half as many students. We divide that up so that children have more airtime and more teacher attention. Really draws them closer to the subject area that they need to be engaged in. So you go from 22 students down to 11 students in each group.
The primary benefit of this approach is that the student-to-teacher ratio is reduced, thereby allowing the co-teachers to maximize participation and minimize behavior problems while teaching.
So you can see how this would be hard for us. We're not together planning, so it's gonna be very difficult. I'm gonna use, I'll use Ms. Richardson as an example. She's mainly in history, but she's got an English class. But you're certainly not planning with English, so for her to come into your classroom and do a complete parallel would be super tough. She'd be like, "Wah, what am I doing?" Right? Highly intelligent woman, that would be tough. Okay? So we don't see this as much here for that reason. Okay? Questions about parallel teaching? Nobody's expecting parallel teaching. Okay? I just wanted you to be able to see, know what it was. And then the last of the 6 is team teaching. We may see this a little, so I wanna make sure we touch on it, but
In this approach, team teaching, both teachers are often in front of the classroom, sharing the responsibilities of lead instruction.
An example of collaboration, we expect our kids to collaborate so often together, and they don't have a model of that a lot of times in a classroom that only has one teacher. And when we can work together to team teach, we can show how to collaborate, so that when we ask them to go work with partners or with groups, they have an example of how to do that.
Another variation of team teaching is when both co-teachers have different but equally active roles in a lesson. One teacher might lead the discussion, and the other teacher might record notes on the overhead projector.
And then if she is up there teaching, I know that they're not understanding it. It's easy for me to say, you, come with me, and, we go to the side. And I would redo the same thing. It's reteaching right there exactly the step that they're being confused on, so that they can have that deeper grow from that understanding right then.
Both teachers are fully engaged in lesson delivery. The teachers must also work well together in terms of gauging their contributions so that lesson pacing is maintained.
okay, so I think some of you may do this like a teeny bit, cause I heard someone talk about, I think it was maybe one of you, English 1, Miss Craig, you were like, kind of chirping in and kind of giving some input. So you're really both working together at the front of the classroom. Planning wise, any ideas of how we could make this work? My thought is, if I'm developing my lesson plans and we're sharing, and that would be our goal, is that we're sharing lesson plans with our special ed inclusion friends. Maybe I want, I'm doing a lesson over grammar, and I know that Miss Craig, like, grammar's her jam. And so in our warm up, Miss Craig, I'm sharing it with you, like maybe in my lesson plan, she's highlighted green, Miss Craig, you're gonna do the warm up. So then gen ed teachers out in the class, right, circulating. Maybe it is something on the board. So there are ways, but you're not gonna like completely team teach all the time. It's impossible given, again, our lack of planning. But we can do it some, okay? So that's the overview of the 6 collaborative teaching structures. Co-teaching is a scary word that kind of, people are like, wow, that's a lot. Questions about the 6 collaborative structures? And really it's all about collaborating. So barriers we face, planning, right? Planning. That's really the barrier. So ways that you can work around it, I heard someone, we talked about like emailing. What are some other ways that we can collaborate with our peers?
Well, if you don't have the common planning time, you just make that extra little bit of time to,
The pop in?
the pop in visit, the stop in the hallway and say, oh, hey. Yeah. You just make the time.
Absolutely. In lesson plans, if you want to note, like, Ms. Craig, yours is always gonna be highlighted in green, so here's what I need you to make sure you know. Or whatever, and it really needs to be something that you guys agree on, okay? Nothing that's gonna make it more work for you, but just so, they know how they can best support you. Cause I know that our special ed teachers, They really, really wanna do all the things they can to help your classrooms run efficiently so that kiddos are successful, okay? I hope I'm speaking okay on y'all's behalf, is that all right? Ms. Gregson? All right, so anybody learn anything new or different, or like brought something back to the forefront of your mind today?
I'm just gonna say that this is the practice I've been doing ever since I've been here. I mean, I work with Ms. Douglas, Ms. Mendez, Ms. Vaughn, so it's just a practice that I've kept. And so it works great. I've even taught the lesson I taught in Ms. Douglas' class, taught the whole class, so, and Ms. Williams, so.
Good.
It's
That's great.
just a practice that I've come up with. I mean, in order for me to be effective, I need to speak the same language,
Sure.
teach the same way they're teaching, and don't do anything different.
I think sometimes we hear co-teaching, we think, we can't do that, but we can. And there are definite ways, and I think this department is really paving the way for how we can best meet kiddos' needs. All right?
And I think it's helpful to have your inclusion teachers do kind of step in, pipe in, like how Mrs. Craig has done it in the city class and in my class, because sometimes it's a different way of presenting the information.
Absolutely.
And maybe I'm just not saying it the right way, cause I've had that happen, like there was one time last year, and I was like,
Why are
help
they
me
doing
help
it?
you, and then Mrs. Craig was like, hold on, I got this, and then we explained it, and the kids were like, oh, I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
we get it now, and they're like, yeah. So sometimes it's just a different way of all of us using our different ways of learning, our different ways of presenting information to the kids' benefit,
Sure.
so.
All right. UDL, new? All right. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming. I'm so sorry I took so much of your PLC time. I hope you're taking something away that is useful, and if you have questions, let us know, all right?